And it's really interesting to remember that, how rapidly it was.
Oh, yeah.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this e-learning session. As we gather for this event from across Canada, connecting virtually together, let us take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so, recognize the various traditional lands on which today's participants and presenters are located. We acknowledge the elders, past, present, and emerging, of all the land we work and live on, and their ancestral spirits with gratitude and respect. Wherever you are encouraged to acknowledge the nation and the Indigenous presence of the land you are on at this moment, and reflect upon your place within these lands. Welcome to this e-learning session. My name is Mark Hazlitt. I'm the President and CEO of CCAE, and we're thrilled to be here this month as we enter the holiday season shortly. I want to say a huge thank you to our presenting partner for our e-learning series, IA Financial Group. They've been with us for close to 20 years supporting CCAE, and we really, as with all of our sponsors, would not be where we are without that support. A special shout out to TD Insurance Meloche Monarchs and MBNA, our national partners. And a longtime sponsor of ours and a good friend is the Offord Group. And we're thrilled today to have Alison Holt, the Managing Director and Senior Consultant and Principal with Offord Group, with us today, and Cathy Yanosik, the President of the Foundation at the Toronto French School. They're going to take you through their presentation. Please feel free to submit questions, comments using either the chat function or the Q&A function in Zoom. I will be monitoring those and sharing those with Cathy and Alison as we move forward. They have left some time at the end for your Q&A, and so hopefully you can jot those down if you don't want to share them during the presentation, but we will get to some time at the end to do that. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Alison and Cathy.
Thanks, Mark, and welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you signed on, or when you signed on, you probably heard Cathy and Mark and I having a conversation. And I would say Cathy and I, in preparing this presentation, it has been one long conversation that keeps going, because we've been comparing our experiences, coming up with ideas, and trying to figure out what might really matter to all of you. We'd actually hope to have, we know that that we have some friends and colleagues and people representing universities, colleges, and schools with us today. And we're really keen to hear from you as well, your ideas, your experiences, and your questions. And we're going to take this, you'll see that these slides, which I may forget to advance, and if so, that's my problem, is more of a guidepost to the kind of conversation that Cathy and I have been having. And I will say, even though boards have been a preoccupation for both of us in our careers, in our long careers, we've dropped the number out. That was one decision we made. But Cathy and I actually started our careers together, and quite a while ago. So this conversation's been going on for a long time. But both of us have been involved with boards and working with boards, advising boards, and serving on boards through our career in different. And so we wanted to bring a little bit of that experience to you. So before I go further, let me introduce formally my my colleague, Cathy Yanosik, who, by the way, is the CCAE Outstanding Achievement Award winner from 2009, and so has a long history with CCAE as well as advancement work. So Cathy has worked throughout her career in advancement for Queen's, for the University of Toronto, for York University, Pathways to Education, St. Mike's Hospital here in Toronto, and has recently, or has joined Toronto French School, where she has actually built the foundation board, and we're going to hear more of that experience. So Cathy has spent a lot of time working directly with boards in ex officio positions in her work, and has served as well. So Cathy, I wanted to ask you, what do you think the most critical role a board plays in terms of fundraising?
Well, I have a really easy answer to that, Alison. Before I do, I just want to say welcome to everybody who's joined us today. And we all know, Alison and I know that December is always the craziest month for fundraisers. And so the fact that you took the time out of your day to dial in is a real compliment to us, and we appreciate you being here. And know that we're sending support and energy to you at the end as we close on the end of a really unusual year. So, so it's great to have you with us. So my really quick answer to the most critical role a board plays from a fundraising perspective, Alison, is really role modeling. And so that role modeling comes both with making their own gift. And, you know, that's something that we need to look to all of our board members to do and to lead the way that way. And also really just role modeling in their support and being a cheerleader, being there to help, you know, send a positive message to the community. So, you know, and Alison, I'd love to hear from you and your perspective on boards as well. And I'm going to now just introduce Alison to those of you who maybe don't know Alison's background as well. Alison, as she mentioned, we started our career at Queen's together. We also worked at the University of Toronto together, and Alison was the founding, she created the development office at Greenwood College School. Before moving into consulting. So Alison has long experience both working within the sector, serving the sector as a consultant, and that would be across all kinds of organizations, including colleges, universities, and schools. And Alison is sitting on a number of boards right now, including Queen's University and Montcrest School, and also recently joining the board for Marts and Lundy as well. So Alison, with all of that experience, you know, I'd love to hear from you. What has been your biggest surprise, maybe working with boards as a consultant?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I've found is that the gap between the expectations and the reality on the ground. You know, I think all of us in fundraising have long known or supported the idea that boards are important to fundraising. Boards make a difference, that it's part of their duties, that if you're going to be supporting the vision of an organization, part of supporting that vision is securing the philanthropy and the engagement to make it happen. So I think that what has surprised me most is that is almost an understood and given among boards and advancement offices, but the reality on the ground has a long way to go. And that's part of the reason that we launched a lot of research into boards. And I'm not going to go into a huge amount of the finding there, but we've done at Marts and Lundy, we've done research on board and the relationship to philanthropy. It started in New York City boards, which are considered in the U.S. to be the highest level of fundraising and connection. And we do a survey there every year. We've done one across Canada. We've done one in independent schools. We've looked across it, and we're trying to bring some facts to that anecdote that boards make a difference to fundraising. I don't think would be any surprise to anyone on the phone that absolutely they make a difference. That when you have a board that's actively engaged as donors and fundraisers, the organization overall does better in fundraising. That having expectations for board members to give is not a bad thing. And in fact, it drives higher giving and higher engagement. And probably most important for all of us is having advancement professionals as part of the recruitment and part of the management of the board makes a significant difference in terms of the success for fundraising overall. And we're going to touch on some of those. What's emerging in some of our more recent ones too, which is a really important consideration, I think, for boards, is the impact that having advancement people around the table can have in terms of meeting diversity goals and objectives as well. This is an emerging finding that we're finding, but something very interesting. But what has struck me as being a consultant is we've done the research, we know it matters, we know that most people out there understand that there is a really important link between boards participating in fundraising and overall success. But just that alone is not enough, that we really need to talk about how to engage people, what we are asking them to do, and to break down some of the barriers that we have imposed ourselves almost, which is afraid of fundraising, maybe thinking that fundraising is all about solicitation and solicitation only, or that I'm not on the board to support that, I'm on the board to do something else. So that's been kind of the basis that Cathy and I have been talking about, is we have the learning and the best practice, but what has been successful in our experience on the ground. So all of that happens during quote unquote normal times. And now we have COVID. And Cathy, you know, everyone knows that this has been a disruptor. You referenced this in your introduction. But on the ground, what has that meant to you and to your board in terms of what you've needed to respond to?
Yeah, and I've seen it because at TFS we have a model where we have two boards. We have the operating board of the school, and we have the board of the foundation that I lead. I've seen this come to play in a few different ways. One consistent theme I would say is that in this period of uncertainty, in a time that none of us have experienced before, we're not, the planning horizon is so short. There really needs to be a lot of trust between the organization and its board. So the CEO or the president and the board. That's been absolutely critical for us, and you saw everybody sort of come together on the ground at TFS. Almost, I described it recently that the board almost came around and formed a little cocoon around, in particular the head of school. I saw them come in and support him and make sure that he had the time he needed to focus on the most critical needs of the school, and being able to so quickly move from having physical classes to going online in the spring. And so that was actually amazing to see how they did that, and almost, helped to lift everybody up that way. I saw it with my own board when we started our budgeting process in the spring for our new fiscal. Our new fiscal started July 1. And so we were doing our budget, right around the time I remember vividly that the Bank of Canada had sort of been saying at the time that there was no way that they felt that they could do projections. And I was in the position where I was having to try to set goals for the year. And I thought, wow, well, if the Bank of Canada can't do it, I'm not sure I know anything they don't. And so I sought the advice of my board, in particular my finance committee, and said, what would you do in this situation? And without any guideposts, and not really knowing how to predict the future. And they came back and completely understood the situation, brought experience from what they were dealing with in their own businesses, and made the recommendation that rather than set, as we normally would, a goal, one precise number that we were trying to hit in terms of our overall fundraising results, that instead we develop a range, a low end and a high end, and that we just have checkpoints through the year to see where we think as things changed, as context changed, as we started to see results, to be able to check in on that over time. So that, again, to be able to have those conversations, have that level of trust with them as well, was so important. And then I really looked to my board when we were at the end of the school year, the fiscal year, when we were thinking, oh gosh, can we ask? We had paused our major gift fundraising for a variety of reasons, but we had some obvious, some internal within the organization, but we had paused it. And but we didn't really want to close out the year without asking. And so we normally do at the end of the year a little campaign with our graduating class, and it's normally just directed towards the parents of the graduating class. And we thought, no, this year, first of all, we want to send those kids a message of support. We love them. They've had a really challenging end of the year. They're going to graduate in a challenging time. We want to send them a message of support. We're going to ask the whole community to come in and participate in this little mini campaign. And so I went to my board and I asked them, would you all please contribute to this? I'd love to be able to say to both the foundation and the school board had participated at 100%, and they did. So 100% participation at a time when we weren't sure if we could ask. And recently, we've re-engaged in our campaign. And again, I've gone to them to say, it's time, guys. I need you at 100% to start to create some momentum and get us back on side. So I've gone to them twice in the last 6 months to ask for 100% participation. And and that's the kind of support I think that the board is offering to us right now, knowing that this is a challenging time.
What I like about those examples, Cathy, is you've touched on, we've been surveying people in the charitable sector, so not just education, but across the board since COVID hit, about what are the impacts. And you've kind of hit on the big questions, some of which are unanswered. I mean, setting goals and expectations has been a significant one. Many people have, many organizations have lowered them for 2020, but are still not sure what to do for 2021, and that uncertainty continues. It's in some ways all hands on deck has also opened up opportunities to engage board members. So you've talked about how you have worked with your board during COVID to address common concerns in fundraising, right? And in doing so, you've actually been engaging them in the way that we're always trying to engage board members. So in some ways, not that anyone would choose it or to underplay the grim and difficult reality of COVID, in our work, there have been some learnings that actually have moved the whole enterprise along. So that tentativeness that you talked about, like unlocking that, when is it right to have those kinds of conversations? When you're able to have those conversations with your board members first, when you're able to test that out, and you're engaging them in meaningful work, it's really helpful. The other question that a lot of people have is, it's kind of that last one, is when is it right to go back to donors? And is the virtual world, does it work or does it not? So you've actually solicited your boards twice recently. Any comments on whether that's how those have been going on, those conversations virtually?
Yeah, I would say it's been great. We've done that kind of approach where it's sort of approaching an entire group to talk about their support, but we've also done one-on-one solicitations as well, virtually. And it's funny because I commented on that to a colleague at the school recently who's not in our department, and she was so surprised that we would make an approach like this over, during a virtual meeting. And I think it's just, we've all adapted.
Mhm.
We've adapted to this reality, and it seems to work. So yeah.
What we found interesting in our work in consulting, unexpectedly, that the conversation, so we do quite a few studies or feasibility studies. And at the beginning, there was a similar kind of concern among our clients that it wouldn't be the right time, that people didn't want to talk about fundraising, or that the virtual environment would impose barriers. And the interesting thing is, after 6 or 7 months of this, none of those have held true. And in fact, we're finding some of the conversations that we're having with donors, with clients, are richer because of the virtual environment.
Right.
And I think, when you think about booking busy people, so if you think about your board members, or you think about your senior volunteer leaders, or your donors, booking volunteers, booking time is easier.
Yes.
They're more focused. If you're trying to get a couple together, it's easier than doing it in person. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues. But when you're thinking about setting up these conversations with people, what we're finding is virtual actually may have some upsides to it.
I agree. I agree. And, we always have working in schools, blackout periods where, it's just the feeling is people are too busy, or they're going to be traveling or whatever. And we don't really have that now. And so it's easier to get people on the phone, or get people online. But I also think that we're going through a period of time where people are sharing more as well,
Mhm.
and the kinds of conversations that you have with people, whether it's a volunteer, whether it's a donor who you just picked up the phone to check in on them, do some stewardship, see how they're doing. Um, People are sharing, and it gives us all the opportunity to create a connection, I think, that we might not otherwise have had the chance to do.
Which is a great point, because that is, so much of this is fundamental to what we know about fundraising or about relationship building. And the stewardship, I think, is a really good point, is that what this has allowed many of us to do is to get back in touch with people who joined our boards or joined our organizations because they wanted to make a difference, are finding new ways to be involved and to think about that, and that's a real positive. So speaking about engaging our board members, and Cathy, you've given us some really good examples. I think most of us on the call know the basics of how important it is to engage people, to that every board member should give it 100%, that that everyone's a fundraiser, although I've started to modify that message just because I think it freezes some people in their tracks immediately, but the core of it remains true. So if we talk about some of those precepts that are givens, but how do we manage that with the reality on the ground? So as we said, we know that on the call, everyone is involved to a certain extent with educational fundraising or educational governance. But those can be very different structures. I mean, Cathy, you work at an independent school, but you're in a foundation structure, which is unique among independent schools. Um, there are only a few in Canada who have a similar structure. Our colleges, our friends at the colleges, have boards that are constituted in a different way. And of course, every institution has its own culture. So you've worked at hospitals, you've worked in social justice organizations, and at universities, one in a foundation, one in not, or two
Right.
not. So you've seen all these kinds of structures. How can we not get caught up in the way our boards are built, but leverage people within those different kinds of structures to make the most of it?
Right. Well, there are all kinds of different structures. And what I often say to people is that, it's not really about the structure. I work in an environment that's very unique, as you say, Alison, with having a foundation. And the model itself is not as important as the relationships. And, you know, one of the things that I've found over time is, you know, there are always trends in everything. And there are trends, first of all, that operating boards are getting smaller. And so there are fewer people to be able to access to leverage. Maybe they're busier, they're all serving on some committee of some sort. So you might actually, maybe that operating board has an advancement committee. And so that's actually how you access the board. Fundraising boards tend to be larger. And so my foundation board is actually substantially larger than the school board already, even though it's only been in existence for a couple of years. I guess one of the things that I have also found over my career is that there's, you know, been a swing in trend where, you know, early in our careers, Alison, you'll remember that, you know, there was almost, it was when organizations were really moving to staff-led fundraising. And so there was a sense of the staff will do it, the staff will call in the volunteers or ask the board members when they need to, if they need to. And there wasn't necessarily, there was a sense of, it was okay to be on a board for, you know, to have just their name there, and they didn't actually have to be engaged. And what I've found over time, and I would say that partly this is, I've benefited, or I feel like I've learned this from moving out of the education system and then maybe back in, is the power of really engaging with the volunteers and giving the volunteers something to own, something to really dig their, you know, put their hands into and really get involved in. And so we always struggle between that feeling of, you know, not having board members stray from governance into operating. But I always tell my board, the foundation board, that it actually, you know, it's a balance, but I do want you in my business. But, you know, it's in particular areas. So, so that is something that I've found over time.
You're
well.
right. It takes specific work. I mean, when you and I were talking about this, I think one of the things that I've seen recently that struck me so much was AFP's salary survey. Buried in there was a list of the things that people liked least about their jobs. And as I recall, one of the things they liked least was managing the board or managing volunteers. And yet, how can we overcome that, or what's standing in that way? Because those relationships are so important. And I think maybe one of the things that we do as a sector is, and we put these kind of expectations, back to the expectations, is that everybody on the board is going to be a fundraiser. Everybody is going to adhere to the best practice. Here's what, you know, we're going to do. And really, it's part of it is about identifying the right people, or the people who to do the right things. So who are the champions? Who are the ones who are comfortable, you know, soliciting or hosting or doing stewardship? That when we're trying to impose board-wide strictures and forget that these are individuals, we can stray. But we have to build those relationships one-on-one with those individuals. So speaking of that trinity of leadership, the president or the head, the chief advancement officer, and the board, what I find often with clients is they all look at each other as being the driver of fundraising, right? So the board will say to the head, you really need to you need a campaign, or you need to raise money. The president says to the chief advancement officer, okay, we need to raise some money, go and get it done. And the chief advancement officer says, I can't do that, I don't have a fundraising board. So how do you strengthen or use that relationship so everyone's moving ahead together?
Right. Well, I would say that one really of what has taken place at my school is we had a a new chair of the board of the school come on board 2 years ago. And one of the first things that she did was to sort of lay out her top 3 priorities for her period of leading the board. And she made fundraising one of her top priorities. So that's on the operating board. And so that then makes it very clear, if it wasn't already, which of course it was, but to the head of school, that was going to be something that she considered important for the entire institution to move forward on, and also made me comfortable that I had a champion there. Not, I already had a champion with my foundation board chair, but to also have that operating board chair consider our work as one of her top 3 priorities, I think was really important. So having that alignment and having ongoing conversation between all 3 of those parties, I think is really critical.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the important things to remember is making sure that philanthropy or fundraising is tied to the ability for the organization to achieve its vision. So it's not something that happens apart from that, but it is. So part of the expectations when everyone is looking for the president's vision for where the school or the university or the college is going, what are our aspirations, making sure that everyone understands that philanthropy will fuel those aspirations, and
Very true.
it is tying it directly the success of the president overall and the board chair to achieving high goals, big ideas, that partnership is really important.
Yeah, very true.
So Cathy, you've had the chance to really build your foundation board pretty much from the bottom up, because you were hired to do that and you came in and have had that. So what we found in our research is that having advancement as part of recruitment for boards makes a significant difference in terms of the ability for the organization, the success or overall of fundraising. And yet a lot of boards don't do it. So a lot of boards haven't don't bring advancement or that particular expertise in. How do you go about recruitment, or what are some of the important lenses that you bring to recruitment that would help a board really be stronger overall, not just in terms of fundraising, but overall?
Yeah, sure. I would say that I feel I take the approach that every seat around the board table, that seat is a very important asset. And so you have to be very strategic, very thoughtful about how you fill it. They're scarce, they're valuable, and so you need to really, really fill your board seats well. And we've all I think learned the lesson about the need for diversity on our boards, and we all have a way to go, I think, to hit our targets on that. I would say that it's absolutely critical that your board reflect your community. And when I look at my board and I think about what each brings to the table, the amount of counsel and advice that I've received from my different board members about how to approach their community and what's important to their community has been absolutely invaluable. So that's really, really important. I think just trying to get it right and make sure that you are thoughtful in your recruiting, take your time, do your due diligence, ask around, make sure that there are no red flags, make sure that this person is going to be a cheerleader. You really need that full support from your board. So, and it's not easy, just like making mistakes and hiring staff is challenging. It's not easy when you make a mistake in recruiting a member to your board. So take your time.
any advice for, I bet there are some around the table here now who are saying, well, that's all fine and good, but we're not around the table. We're not part of those kinds of conversations.
Right.
And how can you build the argument, or are there ways? And I understand that. Like, I understand you don't want it to become only about fundraising or to be perceived about that. We all know in advancement, because we've all worked, that it's about affinity. It's about, yes, capacity, but it's also about that affinity that you talk about, the different perspectives, that we build a much broader and richer view of people and how they might connect to the university or the school and college. So any advice for people? How do we build that case, and who do we build it with?
Right. So, so obviously, depending on where you're at in your organization, I think it's important to have the ear of, the chief advancement officer, to have that person be able to feed into, say, a nominating and governance committee, or a board chair. I often will get a call or be in a conversation with one of the school board members, or this has happened in the past, not just at TFS as well, where people will say, we're looking for somebody who is an accountant, or we're looking for somebody who has this skill set. And I try to have a list ready. So I try to constantly be keeping a running list. I actually code them in our database, so that I know that I think that these people are good board prospects. And so if I'm asked, I can quickly turn that around. And I would always try to say, if, for instance, we were looking for an accountant recently to join our finance committee. And if I have two accountants in front of me, and one has a giving history and one doesn't, I would go with the one with the giving history. It indicates affinity. So that's what I try to look for, and I try to be ready to provide that advice.
Everyone wants an accountant. I studied the wrong thing, but they're like gold on boards.
Absolutely.
CPAs, everyone wants a CPA. So let me combine that, and I know we're moving along, but the last 2 points, we talked a little bit about the right engagement, the right thing, and you and I also talked a little bit about training and board training. So in my consulting practice, I do quite a bit of training or direct work with boards on planning and training. But like with deans, I'm sometimes, or heads of school or presidents of colleges, you're reluctant to use the word training or coaching with people, because it feels clinical. It doesn't feel as engaging. But you had some really good ways that you provided that kind of ongoing, you called it just-in-time coaching, and it was really about their own engagement. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So, so we often do, Alison alluded to this earlier, that often you have board members who will say, I'm just not comfortable fundraising, or I'm not, I'll do this, but I'm not comfortable asking, or whatever. And so I would say the first thing is that, there are lots of ways to engage in the cycle. And so actually asking is just one part of it. And there's all kinds of really important things to do behind the scenes. So I always try to understand where people are coming from, and what is it that you feel that you would like to engage in, and respond to that when I can. But I often, have found myself in situations in the past where I'm, working through a strategy on an approach with a board member or volunteer, and they're saying to me, I don't know how to approach this, or I'm not, help me understand how to start this conversation. And I find that, we'll just do some back and forth, and I will say to them, you know, you might consider, knowing that this person has this kind of affinity, feels this connection, has this in their history, maybe you might want to say something like this. And I actually, you know, do the pitch that I would do if it was coming from me. And I feel that sometimes just hearing that and having those words put into their head that feels comfortable for them to be able to say, all of a sudden gets them past that barrier. And they'll say, you know, I'll hear them say, oh, okay, I can do that. You're right. I can do that. And it doesn't seem so scary. So so I do find that that has been a good way to approach it. And rather than, you know, sometimes people want to come in and have, you know, a training session, and I think that is good. There's a time and a place for that, but having that, you know, just in time support is also, I think, a good way to approach it.
So, oops. Sorry, I'm trying to. There, okay. I have the slideshow under control.
So Alison, you're a board member at both a university and an independent school. So from that side of the table, tell us, what do you think is important for you as a board member in working in philanthropy?
Well, so one of the most important things I do is I try to remember to follow my own advice and do what we encourage our clients to do and the kind of behavior we're talking today. So I always make sure that I give and that I'm an internal champion for giving. I do sometimes have to ask my advancement person to make sure that I don't miss my pledge period when I do that. But and I'm always very conscious of staying on the right side of governance, which can be a challenge because in terms of the board, I'm on the advancement committee of both these boards. And, you know, obviously that experience can be really helpful, but you also don't want to cross into interfering or operating or into things that you want to keep your hands on. So I'm very conscious of trying to play that the governance role in very specifically on the board. But I also try internally to, I don't want to be pigeonholed or to have that position pigeonholed as the fundraising board member or it's just another opportunity to say, well, you know fundraising, you do fundraising, so you can take that on and it takes the heat off of us. So I try to make sure that I'm a very big advocate for engagement of all board members in that, and that I kind of model that active involvement. So always happy to do stewardship calls. Solicitations can be a little bit of a challenge for me given the professional work, depending on who that is, but I always volunteer to, or I'm always happy to solicit my fellow board members. So I make sure that I can do that. And then, you know, just in terms of the expectations, if I'm doing that, if I'm doing stewardship calls, if I'm doing that, what I like is to make sure that I'm getting the preparation and the information, and that I'm confident going out and doing that work required of me as a board member, that I have the support of the staff there. So I a few years ago did a fireside chat with Andy Pringle, and Andy and his wife Valerie are very involved philanthropists and volunteers with a number of organizations across Canada. And I can remember asking him what he expected as a volunteer from staff. And he said he wanted to know that he would get have the briefing that was such a solid briefing. He'd get into the elevator, and by the 12th floor, he knew what the roles were, what the background was, that he could be confident in moving forward with that. And given that I asked him at the same time, how many organizations are you involved with? And he said, I try to keep it to 12 at a time, that he would rely so much on the staff. So that relationship is really, really important, making sure people are comfortable. Right. So we are about to sum up some of what we think, but I think we do have some questions. And maybe we could start to do that, Mark, just before we do our summary slide.
Sure. We have a question. What is your advice to someone starting their role as a CEO of a college foundation board if the college has a sense that the foundation board is not aligned with what the college needs from that foundation board?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I could talk on this for a long time. This is one of the biggest concerns of any organization that has an affiliated foundation, is that the foundation is going to go rogue. And so, you know, there are lots of different ways to deal with it. It is, you know, you need to find a way to create that trust. And sometimes that trust is structural. So for instance, having the foundation, the chair of the foundation board ex officio to the operating board, having the chair of the operating board as an ex officio or as a guest at the foundation board, having reporting relationships that show, you know, I report to both the board and the head of school. So that's important. And then there are things like having a memorandum of understanding between the two organizations as well, that actually lays out the terms of the relationship, what the objectives of the relationship are. And then going beneath that to a service level agreement. So what are the two organizations actually going to offer each other as support, and how will they work together on a day-to-day basis? So those are all really important things. And then I would say procedurally, how are priorities set? So, and that is not an easy thing to work through, because there are a lot of different bodies, there are a lot of different committees, boards to be consulted, and a lot of process to try to work out, to figure out how that actually happens. But that priority setting process is really, really important, and to make sure that there's full communication on that. Mm-hmm. So I mean, that's trying to sum it up in a nutshell. Alison, you probably have seen this too.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. This question came from someone at a college, right, Mark? You know, I think the interesting thing about, and I'm going to assume it's an Ontario college, and maybe I shouldn't, but is that the way the boards are structured means that looking at a different kind of structure for fundraising, like a foundation model, can be attractive. And not that it's right or wrong, but just in the reality that the colleges and how they've been set up and how their governing councils are set up. And I think one of the challenges may be the original intent of that foundation. So not knowing exactly who this is or what it is, but why was the foundation set up? What is the intent of it? And where, you know, the assumption is that it was set up for the benefit of the college. But going back to those original intent and the role that it plays only in support of its one mandate, which is to support the college, you probably have to go back to that intent and refresh that for where things are currently, because sometimes the historical structure is very different and you need to go through it that way. I think, Cathy, everything you talked about was right. And I'm really glad you talked about the priorities, because it's back to that idea that the foundation exists to further the vision and the sustainability of the college. So sometimes different organizations, especially when they're set up as separate entities, become more and more and more separate so that they become the means and the end. And bringing it back to, where does this institution go overall? How do we get there? And what is our role, the foundation board's role, in making it that way? So I agree with you, but there's policy, there's structure, there's intent, and there is common alignment about the future, not the past.
Right, right.
So
And
that's a
even,
huge full-time job. Well,
yeah.
trying to actually raise money too, right?
Absolutely, it
Never,
is.
never
And
easy.
no, and I would say that there's even just some simple things to, like, having a joint board retreat. We've had that at TFS, and because it's also good to, so much can be dealt with just by having human connection. And so people meeting people and knowing that you're all there for the benefit of the institution, and working towards the same goal, I think is an important thing to remember. So yeah.
So one other question before you guys wrap up. It's about 8 minutes to the top of the hour. Alison, you referenced the success that people have experienced in the virtual space. What's the, I mean, it's hard to look at the crystal ball and know what's going to happen, but what do you think the future holds for going back to, face-to-face visits, hooking up with your board chair and going on a call together? And like, what do you both think is going to happen down the road in terms of that kind of, well, what folks were doing before the pandemic started?
Yeah. I think it's like so many things. I think most people think it's not going to go back exactly the way it was before, nor is it going to, are we going to ride the Zoom train forever into the future, so I think what we're discovering is a couple of things. So one is, we have seen our clients have success in moving to the virtual world, in terms of events, in terms of communications, definitely in terms of stewardship, and what we hope would be, and I would include my comment on our own business about how we serve clients and work with clients and talk to their constituents, that we would keep some of the good things that we've discovered, which is, no, you don't have to wait to talk to people about fundraising, even in an emergency. What you do have to think about is your relevancy and the case that you're making, but that people want to make a difference and they want to keep talking about it, especially if it's aligned with the future. That you can have a really rich conversation or a solicitation or a planning meeting virtually, and that in some cases you may want to continue that option because as Cathy said, it's time efficient, it's helpful to schedule, and we don't think that we're going to lose that part of it. And what I would hope is that that's freed people up from any tentativeness they have about reaching out to people. So, I would say, even before the pandemic, what we would find one of the biggest challenges that organizations have is around really good stewardship. And when you think about the pandemic, what so much of us have done from organizations is fundamental stewardship, is reaching out, see how people are, how are they doing, and that's had a very big impact. I hope that part doesn't go away. Cathy, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. I think, before this happened, it never would have occurred to me to have a virtual meeting with somebody and ask them for a major gift over a virtual meeting. Now, I know it's part of everyday life, so I won't hesitate to do it. I think, you know, and I agree. We've experienced at the school some of our best attendance rates at, you know, full school parent events, or we're about to have our regular alumni holiday social online, and great attendance. You know, being able to get people who would have found it difficult to get a babysitter, you know, and drive, whatever. So we will probably continue to have a mix of physical events, on, you know, on campus events, and virtual events going forward. So so yeah, I agree. It's things will change, but I don't think they will go back to normal.
And in some cases, that's a very good thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
as
we're about 3 minutes to the top of the hour, Alison, so over to you.
All right. So you know what, as Cathy and I, and probably Mark Hazlitt too, could talk about this all day. And I talked about how in planning this, Cathy and I had some really long conversations, but they were really helpful for me. And I'm going to speak for hopefully for both of us, that if anyone wants to reach out to us afterwards, a lot of you know where we are, but I'm sure CCA will send that out as well. Be happy to continue the conversation that way. So just I think in sum, to talk about some of the things that we've talked about, the biggest recommendations I think that Cathy and I would have is identifying and cultivating the real champions. So of course you're working with your whole board, but who are the ones who are, for whatever the particular action is, you can do it, who are really going to push that along. Talking about engagement, not fundraising, and asked Cathy this last night, is that controversial? Because on this call, among all of us, we're all very focused around fundraising. But Cathy, you used the word scared, and I think that no matter what, no matter how people understand that it's part of their responsibility, that they're committed to it, that they understand the important role, when it can be so reductive to think that fundraising comes down to solicitation, and that part scares me. So as professionals, all of us, talking about engaging as opposed to fundraising, building that specific case for engagement. So why it matters that board members are here, not just in best practice, not just in terms of the data, although those are helpful, but in terms of that broader support of the mission and why they came on the board in the first place. Starting with stewardship is easy. We just talked about this, how COVID has made it even more important, and that's showing us how it's important and how it works. We just went through the virtual advantage, and one of the things I wanted to highlight, because we hadn't had a chance to talk about it, is that there is work beyond the vice principal or the chief advancement officer, that all staff. And Kath, you talked about what you did at St. Mike's, which I thought was such an excellent model. Could you just, because we haven't talked about it yet.
Sure. We had a staff person partnering with every board member. So that staff person was there to make sure that that board member had everything they needed to do their work, to make sure they did their work, and that they were able to report on it as well. So it was almost like we needed to make sure that when our board member was at the table and asked to report on their activities, they were ready. And it was the development officer's responsibility to make sure that they were ready. And so those are great relationships, and it's a great opportunity for somebody at the development officer level to have some engagement with the board and to start to develop those relationships.
Yeah, I thought that was a great idea. And never forget, it's all about people, right? In all of our lovely idiosyncrasies, each board member is individual. They have their own reasons why, and their own reasons for being there. So thank you. 201. Oops. Sorry, Mark. Not bad for the two of us, though, I have to say.
Yeah, not bad.
Well, a huge thank you to both of you for that. I think lots of nuggets of information in there. And as you said, and anybody on the call, if you want to connect with either Alison or Cathy, we can certainly facilitate those connections to carry on the conversation. The session has been recorded, and so that's another way to re-listen and make those connections. I want to thank Cathy and Alison again for not just today, because there's some work ahead of today to get ready, so I know it takes a little bit of time. Also, our presenting partner, IA Financial Group, once again, and our national partners, TD Insurance, Meloche Monix, and MBNA. Thanks everyone for participating. Please stay healthy and safe wherever you are, and have a great holiday season if we don't see you back at CCA next week for our last session of the year. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.